I often travel to speak to different groups about my books, and usually when I'm on a plane, I put in my earbuds and I either fall asleep or do some work on my computer, but sometimes I'll chat with my neighbor. A while back, for example, I was flying to Chicago, and I asked the guy next to me, do you live in Chicago, or are you going there for work? I live there, he said. How about you? I'm going there for work, I said, and I pulled out my earbuds, and he said, what kind of work do you do? And I said, I'm a writer. And just as I was getting those earbuds in, he said, oh, what kind of books do you write? And I said, I was a pastor for 24 years, so I write books about God and faith and Jesus and things like that. At which point, he grabs his earbuds and began putting them in, and he says, okay, well, I'm not into organized religion. I said, oh man, I am so into organized religion. I was a pastor, now I write and speak to clergy, so I am deeply into organized religion, and I see why you wouldn't be interested in it, which made him laugh. And then I asked him, hey, what is it you don't like about organized religion? What's the worst thing about organized religion? He said, I never really thought about it. It's just not my cup of tea. I don't want to put words in your mouth, I said, but maybe the problem isn't that religion is organized. I mean, I don't think you're saying that if religion were just worse organized, it would be fine. He laughed, and I said, well, maybe the problem is that religion is really well organized, but for the wrong purposes. He said that made sense. And I said, do you mind me asking? Yeah, I'm really curious. What do you wish religion were organized to do? Without hesitating a second, he said, well, one thing's for sure. It shouldn't be organized to protect pedophile priests and make sleazy televangelists rich. And it shouldn't be organized to make people prejudiced against people of other religions. It would be nice if religion were organized to teach people to love each other and understand each other. It would be nice if religion were organized to help poor people, and not just with a handout, but to have more opportunities and better health care and better jobs and working conditions. And it would be nice if religion could organize people to take better care of the environment. Well, that's what part 3 of the Great Spiritual Migration is about. What if our churches were centers for recruiting, training, and deploying spiritual activists, people who work together for the common good? What if we migrated from organized religion to organizing religion, religion organizing for the common good? What if our spirituality energized us for action so that we address through our inner work the same greed, fear, anger, and apathy that are plaguing the world around us? Everybody's concerned about the future of the church, about how it's shrinking and wrinkling. But consider this. Maybe what is declining and dying is a form of the church that is organized for the wrong purposes. Maybe the most important thing for us at this moment is to rediscover what the right purposes should be. Maybe then the church that we need can come into being.
Brian, to hear more about this last movement, this missional migration, we have some more questions for you to dig deeper.
Great.
The first migration was from a system of belief to a way of life. The second migration was from a violent view of God to a nonviolent view of God. So how do those relate to this third missional migration?
Yeah, well, you can kind of see how they flow together, because if the essence of the gospel is a call to love, love God, self, neighbor, including other, stranger, and enemy, and the earth, if that is the purpose of this thing, that's going to affect how we organize as churches. Mm-hmm. If we're organizing to teach people to live lives of love, that's really what we're about, then that's going to lead to our sense of mission. If we believe that God loves some people and not other people, if we believe God is nationalistic, or if God has a religious supremacy, right, then our mission is going to be organized in one way. It'll be organized very differently if we believe that God loves everybody. Mm-hmm. And this, to me, one way to summarize this is to say that to be called by God, to be part of God's team, is not to say God loves us instead of them, but God loves them and has invited us to join God in loving them. God loves us, God loves them, but we want to join God in the loving of everybody. And that really changes the way we structure our churches. I grew up in a form of Christianity that was highly regressive. And we, in many ways, the walls of our church were the perimeter of God's concern for the world. The only way anybody could be helped by God is to get him into our church, right? And my years as a Christian, my years in ministry have simply made me want to blow those walls out and say, no, God's concern is for everybody. Let's join God in that.
So you write that Christianity needs to move from a religion organized for self-preservation and privilege to a religion organizing for the common good. Unpack that for us.
Well, I think a whole lot of us who are involved in church life, whether we're clergy or lay leaders who are deeply involved in the church, we try to do missions, we try to do outreach, we try to do things to serve the community. But I think they always feel like little add-ons. It's kind of like the dessert or the appetizer, you know? And the main course is other things. Sometimes the main course isn't even that obvious, you know? Sometimes the real purpose we're there is because we're stuck doing this because our parents got us into it, you know? Or because there's a cemetery out back, we got to keep this thing going, you know, to keep the cemetery lawn mowed or something like that. I mean, there's all kinds of things at work. But if we start by saying that God loves the world, I know that's a radical concept, but God actually loves the world, and God is healing this world and is inviting us to join God in the healing of the world. If that's what we believe, then in a sense, every moment of our gatherings are helping further that purpose. And in that sense, we might make a distinction between church work. That's like making sure that there's coffee, you know, and making sure that the hymnals are out and making sure the bulletin is there. Well, you know, important things. That church work is not the same as the work of the church. Right. The work of the church is how we empower people to live their faith in a way that makes a difference in the world. So the work of the church is when that person sitting in the third row is out in their front yard on Thursday afternoon, and one of their neighbors walks by and they get into a conversation, and he finds out that there's a family crisis going on, and so that neighbor becomes a neighbor, you know. Or when somebody back in the sixth row back there, who's a medical doctor, starts to see that there's a big problem with addiction and there isn't enough addiction services, and so comes back to the church and says, I see this need in my professional life, maybe we can do something about it, right? Now it's the whole congregation and our whole lives being interwoven with a sense that God loves the world and we just want to join God in the healing of the world.
Brian, you write a lot about social movements in the book. Why are those important?
I'll tell you something that happened to me. I tell this story in the book in some detail. But I have a friend who did his doctorate on the intersection of social movement theory with ecclesiology, our understanding of the church. And I had a long plane ride after I was with him, and we were talking about this. And he gave me this list of 6 characteristics of social movements. So I was on this long plane ride. I pulled out my trade table. Usually now I read my Bible on my phone or on my computer, but I actually had a physical Bible in my pack. So I pull out my Bible, open up to Matthew chapter 1. I take his 6 characteristics of social movements, and I just start flipping through the pages, writing notes. Yeah. And what I realized is Jesus is a movement leader. Everything Jesus does is social movement. And then you keep going to the book of Acts. Guess what Paul is? He's a classic movement leader. And I start to realize that this thing that started as a movement, we turn into an institution. Now listen, institutions are fine. I'm totally pro institutions. Again, we have to ask what their purpose is, you know, what are they here for? But it made me understand that what Jesus was about was a movement. You know, we could say the same thing. I think for Methodists, John Wesley, he was a movement guy. You know, what we think of as hymns, in some ways they were like movement songs, you know. And for us to rediscover this idea of movement, I think is absolutely essential. I often say, I'm more worried about the church as an institution having a resurgence for the wrong purposes than I am with it fading away. But what would be so ideal for us is if there could be a movement that arose among us, a movement of the Spirit that engaged us with those real intended purposes for the church. If that happened, it would transform everything for us, and not only be good for us, but it would really be good for the world.
I want to ask a question about culture wars. How does this idea of missional migration relate to culture wars?
Okay, so movements can either be progressive in the sense that they're saying where we are is okay, but we have to keep moving. We got to keep moving in a certain direction. Let's call those progressive movements. Then I think there are conservative movements. Conservative movements say, things are really good right now. Rather than risk any change, we don't want to fall back. Let's just stay where we are. And then there are regressive movements. Those movements say, where we are is bad. The way is not forward. The world would be better if we could go into the past. And what you could say is that all of our churches, it happens in local congregations, but it happens also in denominational headquarters. They have movements knocking on their door. Some of those movements are progressive, some are conservative, some are regressive. And in some ways, what our culture wars are about are arguments about whether the way forward, we should go forward, whether we should stay where we are or go backwards.
You just talked about the boundaries the church tries to put up. It makes me think about the question around common good. And so for community, what's the community for which the good is common?
Yeah.
And how do you define that community? I think churches wrestle with that sometimes.
Oh my goodness. And here's where our churches could play a really critical role in a lot of the tension we feel in our nation right now. So urban people have a set of problems that are real problems for them. The problems of rural people can seem so distant. And so then what happens is you have people who say these are the real concerns and people who say these are the real concerns. It seems to me our churches could help these folks say, hey, those are your neighbors over there. Their problems are your problems. And these people say the same. I watched this happen. I used to live near Chesapeake Bay, and there was terrible pollution problems in Chesapeake Bay. And there were watermen, guys who made their living catching crabs and oysters and fish in Chesapeake Bay, who went to church every Sunday. They found out that a lot of the problems that were happening in Chesapeake Bay were because of cattle farms in Lancaster Valley up in Pennsylvania. Guess what? Most of those people went to church too. And the pastors of those churches got those people together. They took busloads of farmers from Lancaster County down to Chesapeake Bay and helped them see, when you guys don't properly deal with ecological issues there, the results kill the fish and oysters and crabs for these guys. They took these guys there, helped them see the complexity of their farming operations. To me, that was the church working for the common good and helping people expand their circle of concern.
I was curious about something, Brian. You talked about your childhood church being regressive, and then a few points in the book you talk about the Jesus movement as it seemed to be a formative influence. I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about what did the Jesus movement teach you? What did it do for you? Because you reflect on it a few times.
So, it's the Jesus movement was an incredibly powerful experience in my life in the 1970s, and there's a whole lot of other people roughly my age for whom it was very powerful. On the successful side, what I can tell you is that movement took a lot of us out of our pews where we sat there holding hymnals and where religion was about what you didn't drink and you didn't smoke and you didn't do on Saturday night, right? And it gave us this powerful sense that there is a movement and we're part of something bigger, and it happens in all of life. But here's the sad thing. If a movement makes proposals and demands to an institution, I have to look back and say, what proposals and demands did we make? And here's what I think our proposals were. We demand that we can wear blue jeans to church and we can have guitars instead of organs. Well, okay. But then you think, what would we like to say today? What would be the proposals that we're making today? And I don't think today our proposals should be made primarily to the church. I think our proposals are made to the culture and to the world at large, and we want to call the church to be involved in that process. We want to thank everybody for being part of this discussion and conversation, and we hope that in your group you will be asking the next round of questions that will help you be part of God's ongoing movement in this world.